Okay, I'm going to start this video by taking an observation of the news site that's displaying this article, which is The Independent, which is a pretty well respected British online journal. If you go to Media Bias Fact Check here, you can see it's got a left center bias, so it's biased to the left, but not extremely to the left. It's basically slightly biased to the left, but it says factual reporting high. It's been around since 1986. This is not a tabloid. This is not just some fly-by-night news site. This is a well-respected, liberal British journal. Okay, so now that we've established that, this picture here, it's clearly meant to evoke some kind of emotion, some kind of a emotional response from the reader, from the viewer. These women with their particular dress, the headgear they have on, this is all very reminiscent of The Handmaid's Tale. I mean, this is pretty much iconic of this book that was written, a dystopian novel by Canadian author Margaret Atwood in 1985. It's set in near future New England, a totalitarian state resembling theonomy, which has overthrown the United States government. The Handmaid's Tale explores themes of women and subjugation in a patriarchal society and the various means by which these women attempt to gain individualism and independence. And there's also now a television show, I think on Amazon. It's very highly accredited, but the point is, this kind of iconography, what is going on, right? I mean, whatever this article is about, it must be something very serious. It must be some kind of horrific maltreatment or abuse, or some kind of impending oppression of women. You know, to use this kind of imagery, we must be dealing with something very serious and very damaging to women in Britain, right? I mean, that's the assumption. I mean, clearly, this is an extreme kind of picture. The goal of this, what this is trying to evoke. So keep that in mind. We'll look at the title of the article, which is called "The Fact That We're Considering Making Misandry a Hate Crime Should Concern Everyone Who Believes in Equality." And this is written by Victoria Smith 5 days ago. One thing I want to comment on some of the narrative styles that she uses in this paper. It's very interesting. She introduces a lot of concepts into the paper, into her writing. She does it very subtly, in almost a deceptive way. So she introduces a concept, but states it as a fact. And so within the first sentence, you can see this: women A, always saying they want equal treatment, then the moment it's offered to them, they start to complain. Well, no, we're not saying that. The reader isn't saying that. Presumably, the reader isn't a sexist person. But what you might say is that feminists so there's a stereotype of feminists that they want equal treatment and they want equality, but they actually want superiority over men. So that is a stereotype, right? But the fact that she's framing it as women, as if all women in the world want some kind of equal treatment, but then they actually secretly want to be superior or secretly want some kind of special treatment. No, I don't know who's making that argument, but certainly there's a stereotype that feminists, and it may be an unfair stereotype. That's what the goal of this video is to discuss, right? So the way that she's framing this already, she has presented this. She brought it up, okay? Nobody was saying that. She says, feminists, always saying they want equal treatment. The moment it's offered to them, they start to complain. I think that's a more accurate representation of what is often thought of. Okay, take the recent proposals to make misogyny a hate crime. Given current levels of street harassment, sexual assault, and male violence against women, this can only be a good thing. But why stop there? Why not make misandry, prejudice against men and boys, a hate crime too? Surely that way no one is left out. Wow, this is so reasonable. I mean, this sentence, this paragraph is so reasonable. What? Yeah, of course. I mean, if we're gonna make sexism a hate crime, just make all sexism a hate crime, right? I mean, if that's the direction you want to go, let's just cover it all. All sexism is hate crimes. That it's fair, it's equal, it's simple, but case closed. All right, pretty simple. Last month it was announced that a law commission review would look at whether offenses driven by hatred of women should be reclassified. At present, certain characteristics such as disability, race, and sexual orientation have a protected status. Sex is not one of them. Again, totally reasonable. Why should a discrimination based on someone's religion, or based on someone's culture, or skin color, or sexual orientation, why should that be considered a hate crime, but then, discrimination based on sex not be a hate crime? She's making perfect sense, right? This is reasonable, totally reasonable. Feminists have argued that the degree to which misogyny underpins crimes committed against women means this has to change. However, it has since emerged that the Commission will also be reviewing whether misandry deserves to be included in the new definitions. According to Home Officer Minister Baroness Williams, this is in response to what, quote, the public and other organizations are telling us. Okay, so it seems the feminists are arguing that misogyny should be made a hate crime, and the British people, the public and other organizations, are saying so should misandry. We want equality. Why, if we're going to make sexism a hate crime, let's make sexism a hate crime. Again, totally reasonable. I mean, everything in here is totally reasonable. It makes sense why the British people would want it. It would make sense why the Home Office Minister would be concerned with only making sexism wrong for half the population and ignoring the other half. So, okay, totally reasonable so far. This is great. Now, here, this is the moment. This is the first sentence in which things begin to change. The narrative kind of begins to change. She says, as a feminist, I confess I am not happy about this. I am also well aware of the way in which such unhappiness will be perceived by many. It's typical feminist, right? I say I want equality, but I actually want special treatment. I say I think women are strong, but I actually want them to be weak. I say feminism isn't about hating men, but actually it is. Okay, so again, she seems to be playing devil's advocate. This mirrors the first sentence. She's doing the same thing. It's like she's addressing this huge elephant in the room. It's almost like she realizes that she's being hypocritical because she's bringing this up of her own accord. I mean, she doesn't have to be playing devil's advocate. She doesn't have to be continuously kind of self-depreciating and saying, "Oh, I know how it's going to look. I know how this is going to be." It's like she's preparing us for the bomb, right? A bomb is coming. You see. I mean, you feel it. It's like this is too easy so far. She's been too reasonable. What is this article even about? But then, she says here, I confess I'm not happy. I'm not happy about this. Okay. Typical feminist, right? So she's playing devil's advocate. It's like she's playing on our sympathies. Well, because she's woke, because she realizes that feminists are perceived this way, must be wrong, right? I mean, it must be incorrect. I am familiar with all of these arguments. Again, she's kind of displaying her wokeness and the way in which they are used, time and again, to recast women's demands for recognition of their unequal status as requests for validation of their victimhood. It seems that there's nothing women can have, not even their status as a marginalized sex class, that men will not expect them to share. Okay. This sentence right here, which by the way, is at the top of the article. It seems there's nothing women can have, not even their status as a marginalized sex class, that men will not expect them to share. This must be one of the most important points, or the most important point of the whole article, given that it's quoted at the top. there are so many things wrong with this sentence, I don't even know where to start. Well, first of all, is feminism not about equality? I mean, are we not being told that the whole point of feminism is that men and women have equal rights? We share the burden of equal responsibilities in society. You know, that we have equal accountability, equality in every way that you can be equal under the law. So why would men not expect women to share this, right? Why would men not expect women to share any given thing? Why would women get special treatment? It doesn't make sense. If the goal of feminism is to treat everyone equally regardless of gender, why would this be an exception? Why would women's status as a marginalized sex class be different? Well, I'll tell you why. Because if men and women had a status as a marginalized sex class, it would mean everyone was a marginalized sex class. And if everyone was a marginalized sex class, nobody could be a marginalized sex class, right? And so that seems to me to be the motivation here. No, men can't share the status with us because it would make it totally irrelevant. But notice this. She's saying, I'm familiar with all these arguments, the way in which they're used, to recast women's demands for recognition of their unequal status as a quest for validation of their victimhood. So here we go, validation of victimhood, and the fact that she's saying we want a status as a marginalized sex class, and men are not allowed to share that, right? I mean, it seems implicit here. She wants this marginalized sex class. She doesn't want men to have it. She doesn't want to share it with men. This is something that belongs to women and women only, and men cannot share it. Okay, this is there. So she wants, it says just the sentence before, validation of victimhood and status as a marginalized sex class, men cannot share these things. This is classic psychological tactic called victim playing. It's also known as playing the victim, victim card, or self-victimization. It is the fabrication of victimhood for a variety of reasons, such as to justify abuse of others, to manipulate others, coping strategy, or attention seeking. It says, manipulators often play the victim role, quote, poor me, by portraying themselves as victims of circumstances or someone else's behavior in order to gain pity or sympathy, or to evoke compassion and thereby get something from someone. Caring and conscientious people cannot stand to see anyone suffering, and the manipulator often finds it easy and rewarding to play on sympathy to get cooperation. So this is classic playing the victim. And she's saying it right here. Our victimhood has to be validated. No one else can share our status, because if they did, nobody would be a victim. If men shared, men expect us to share our victimhood, how dare they? We can't share that. That's ours. Right? She's casting it as if there's ownership, as if women want this. Their status as a marginalized sex class will not be shared by men, and this is important because it is classic playing the victim. I mean, if there's equality here, if everyone becomes a marginalized sex class, then there's no marginalized sex class, and therefore you can't play the victim anymore. There'd be no reason for it. The argument that misogyny has its counterpart in misandry, and that only a misandrist would deny it, is superficially attractive. Well, no, I'd say it's more than superficially attractive, it's just attractive. There's a satisfying symmetry to it, not to mention a degree of truth. Well, no, I mean, it's not, there's not a degree, look, there's not degrees of truth, right? I mean, this is like the alternative facts kind of argument. It's like something's either true or not true. It's not, you can't have a 60% true. Definitionally, it's true. Misogyny and misandry are definitionally two sides of the same coin. One is sexism against men, and one is sexism against women. That's not a degree of truth. That they are counterparts. Definitionally, I mean, there's nothing to argue about, right? That's not a degree of truth. That's specifically true. Everyone is potentially as much as a victim as an oppressor, Yeah, everyone can be a victim, everyone can be an oppressor. All things being equal, everyone ought to be treated the same. Yeah, well, of course, that's totally reasonable. The trouble is, all things are not equal. That is, rather, the point of hate crime legislation in the first place. Okay. I don't agree with this. Okay. Whether or not you want to agree with all things are equal, her claim is blatantly false, because she's saying the whole point of hate crime legislation is that things aren't equal. But that's not the point of hate crime legislation. We could live in a total equalized society, whatever that means. I don't know what that means, but everyone is given equality under the law. Okay, we could live in a perfect utopian equal society. I don't think such a thing exists, but this is just a thought experiment. And you could still have laws against sexism, right? Because just because under the law men and women are equal, that doesn't mean that specific individuals cannot target you based on your sex or your religion or your culture or whatever, right? So no, the point of hate crime legislation is it's not because things aren't equal. It would be useful regardless of that. It has nothing to do with that. Sexism can exist in any society, regardless of how equal it is at the government level, but at the state level, at the level of the law. So no, the point of hate crime legislation is to prevent sexism, right? Even at the individual level. It does not require an unequal society. I would say Britain and in the UK, men and women are equal under the law. So no, I disagree. I disagree with you. You don't have to have an unequal society for laws against sexism to be relevant. All of our actions take place within intersecting social hierarchies, which place some groups at the top and others at the bottom. Okay. So here, she's introducing a new concept, which is basically Marxism. She is introducing this kind of Marxist philosophy, this idea that we have these intersecting social hierarchies, which place some groups at the top and others at the bottom. And she's introducing this as fact. She's introducing this as if you just accept it as a fact. You've been to a liberal arts class and you've read about communism and you just accept it. She's not trying to defend it. She's putting it out there as if it's fact, and you're supposed to accept it just because she wrote it down. But of course, this is. I don't think any reasonable person would just accept this at face value, given that she takes no effort to explain it whatsoever. Attempts to make misandry the equivalent of misogyny rely on two misconceptions. Okay? First, that gender is a spectrum as opposed to a hierarchy. Okay. This is amazing. Okay, so this is the first misconception, according to her, that gender is a spectrum as opposed to a hierarchy. So wait a minute. Have we not been told for the past 20 years by feminists, by the progressive culture, that gender is a spectrum? That men and women are on the extremes. On the left extreme, say a man, on the right extreme is a woman. Everything in between is gray area, right? And that's why we have all these hundreds of different genders and gender fluidity and LGBTIIQA thing and all these gender pronouns, because it's a spectrum. That's what they've been telling us. I mean, that's the reason we have transgender bathrooms. That's the reason that there's all kinds of arguments in legislation and in the courts and all over the places, because it's a spectrum. It's not black and white. It's all these shades of gray. That's what we've been told. But she's saying, no, it's not a spectrum. No, it's a hierarchy. Well, here's the problem. She is admitting that they're mutually exclusive. It can't be a spectrum and a hierarchy. She says the first misconception is that gender is a spectrum as opposed to a hierarchy. Well, what's the problem with that? In a hierarchy of gender, there's only a specific amount. It's like male and female. Those are the only genders, right? Because if you get rid of the spectrum, she's saying it can't be a spectrum because it's a hierarchy, then you get rid of all these gender fluidity and all these hundreds of genders and all these ideas of gender pronouns and all these things because it's no longer a spectrum, right? It's a hierarchy. So what's going on here? Are we to just reject everything we've been told for 20 plus years by the feminists and progressives and the SJWs that the gender is a spectrum, and now we're down to two genders on a hierarchy? This is insane. I mean, this is a philosophy of convenience. And second, that victimhood is in fact a source of power and privilege. I will come back to this part. I would actually say there's a third. I would say attempt to make misandry the equivalent of misogyny relies on a third misconception that she would have to add, a third misconception, and that would be that you have to reject science. Because science, the prevailing narrative within science is that gender is a spectrum, right? That we understand that we categorize mammals within male and female out of convenience, but that the evolutionary process isn't perfect, and that genetic defects can happen, and nobody that there's basically that the process of evolution is not perfect, and the way that genes and chromosomes replicate and come into being is not a perfect process, and so everyone has these qualities that can be considered male and female. That it's part of a spectrum. So you would have to reject. So you have to reject what feminists have been telling us for 20 years. You have to reject the scientific view of gender in mammals, and then you have to reject this idea that victimhood is in fact a source of power and privilege, which again I'll come back to. It is true that men and boys are harmed by the insistence that all male people be masculine. I disagree. True, too, that it hurts for all members of a group to be judged by the actions of a violent minority. Okay, I agree with that. Nevertheless, these are the conditions upon which the perpetuation of male supremacy relies. To ask that the negative side effects of being a member of the oppressor class be granted the same status as those of being a member of the oppressed class is to miss the point. Any suffering that comes from wielding power can only be relieved once that power has been relinquished. Okay, again, this is so communist. I mean, I'm not, look, the point of this video is not to criticize communism. It's not to criticize postmodernism. It's not to criticize any of the leftist Marxist thinking or socialism. It's not, okay? I consider myself a member of the left. I consider myself politically left-leaning. The point is, she is introducing these concepts as if the reader has read and agrees with the Communist Manifesto, as if they understand the life of Karl Marx. I've studied Karl Marx. I understand where these ideas are coming from, but she's offering them as if they are just reality, and that everyone reading this is just going to agree with her. Because as if this is like the universally accepted ideas, the oppressor class and the oppressed class, and those wielding power must relieve the power and it has to be relinquished, and the supremacy, the male supremacy and the patriarch and all this stuff. It's like, no. I mean, you're welcome to believe that. Many people do believe that, but you are presenting a theory, a social theory, as an objective fact, and you're wrong. You're just wrong, okay? So-called men's rights activists, MRAs, routinely portray women's marginalized status as something to be envied. Feminists are accused of milking historic oppressions in order to appropriate power and resources in a world where positive discrimination in favor of women is rife. I don't care what the MRAs think. It's been said that when you're used to privilege, equality feels like oppression. Boy, this is rich, right? This is rich. This sentence right here, it's been said that when you're used to privilege, equality feels like oppression. Equality would be if misandry and misogyny were treated equal under the law, right? That would be equality. If all sexism was treated equally, was punished equally, that would be equality. So it's said that when you're used to privilege, equality feels like oppression. You're admitting this is projection, right? She is projecting onto us her own position. Look, let's look at projection. This is classical psychological projection. Psychological projection is a theory in psychology in which the human ego defends itself against unconscious impulses or qualities by denying their existence in themselves while attributing them to others. So in this case, the unconscious impulse or quality would be privilege, right? She's privileged. She's privileged. She's privileged because she's saying equality feels like oppression. This is equality as if all sexism is treated equally. She is projecting her own insecurities, her own position of privilege onto who she views as her opponents. Equality under the law feels like oppression. Isn't that not what this whole article is about? This, it seems to me, is what usually happens when men complain of misandry. Women take an inch, and all male onlookers see her miles and miles. Well, I don't think you have to bring gender into it. It's clear that you're taking miles and miles here. I suspect it is unlikely that misandry will ever be made into a hate crime. That there is even the slightest possibility that it could be remains hugely concerning. This is unbelievable. This woman is so privileged, and she views this feminist position as so privileged. She says, I suspect it is unlikely that misandry will ever be made into a hate crime. There is even the slightest possibility that it could remains hugely concerning. Again, the level of entitlement here. To her, the idea that there could ever be equality under the law is hugely concerning. That there's even the slightest possibility that there could ever be equality under the law is hugely concerning. The level of entitlement here, the level of privilege. I think the term privilege is totally freaking useless. I don't like it. But if it does exist, it's just projection. She's projecting the very thing onto her opponents that she is guilty of. But let's go back to something I mentioned before. Okay, and this was her second misconception. That victimhood is in fact a source of power and privilege. This is proof. This is proof that it is. Here's the proof. It is highly unlikely that misandry will ever be made into a hate crime. That there is even the slightest possibility that it could remains hugely concerning. This is, again, going back to the victim playing. The point of victim blaming, playing the victim, is power, right? It gives you power over others. She is using this idea of all women as being an oppressed group to have this kind of political power in which equality under the law, she doesn't even believe it's possible. It's highly unlikely that it will ever happen, that it's even the slightest possibility is hugely concerning. So no, yes, in fact, victimhood is in fact a source of power and privilege, and this is undeniable proof. It would undermine the most basic feminist arguments in favor of sex-based protections for women, effectively endorsing the MRI claim that, quote, reverse sexism exists. So again, she's bringing up the MRAs. She brings it up multiple times in this article, and I guess the idea is if the MRAs say it, it must not be true. The MRA, the greasy MRAs, if they say it, these are the pinnacle misogynists. And no, okay. The MR claim that reverse sexism exists. No, it's not reverse sexism. It's just sexism, right? There's no reverse sexism. They're just sexism. There's sexism against men and there's sexism against women. Period. It would also provide further opportunities for abusive men to recast women's resistance to their demands as hate. Women and girls face enough censure for any failure to accommodate men and boys. Where would we be if the latter could start to claim our treatment if one of them was motivated by anti-male bigotry? Misogyny should be recognized as a hate crime for the same reason that misandry should not be. Women and girls are systematically oppressed and exploited by men and boys. Again, this is just the radical feminist narrative, which she is presenting as fact, right? She's expecting you as the reader to agree with, and it's, in my opinion, total BS. And it's certainly not universally accepted. Even if you agree with it, it's certainly, she's presenting it as an objective, fact-based statement, and it is not. She says, this does not always have to be the case. We can have a world in which all things are equal, but first let's stop telling women to pretend we're already there. Okay. How can we have a world in which all things are equal when you don't want us to be equal under the law? How can we have a world in which all things are equal and when you specifically just said that it is highly unlikely that misandry will ever be made into a hate crime? Okay, what you're saying, if it's unlikely that it will ever be made into a hate crime, that means it's unlikely that the law will ever be equal, that sexism will be treated equally under the law. So if this is your position, that we can never treat sexism under the law, it's hugely concerning to treat all forms of sexism as the same under the law, then how are we ever going to achieve equality? This whole article, she's just contradicted herself over and over and over again. And it's totally clear that she's not interested in equality. She is interested in having special treatment. I mean, she mentions it herself. It's amazing. She's her own worst critic. She mentions it throughout the article. She seems to totally be completely aware of the elephant in the room. And she feels as though, well, as long as I address the elephant in the room, I'm woke, and it's not true. Well, no, unfortunately, just because you see how hypocritical you are, it doesn't make you any less hypocritical. I'm glad that you are aware enough to see that you're hypocritical. But one other thing I want to say is that this entire article could be satire. Do you disagree? I mean, this article could be written on a satire site. You wouldn't have to change a word, and it would pass, and people could read this article, and they'd be like, wow, this is hilarious satire. Do you disagree? I mean, is there anything about this article, just in terms of its overall absurdity and the way that it makes feminism look totally sexist, right? Now, I've read through all the comments. Every one of these comments, I'm not going to go through all of them, but you can look through them yourself. I'll post the page in the comments, the website. But hate is a natural human emotion. Attempting to police it isn't a good idea. An even worse idea is the arbitrary and unequal application of the law to different groups. I mean, every single person in here, misandry must absolutely be included. Every single comment I see. What do we want? Equality. When do we want it now? Okay, here you go. Have some equality. Oh, boo-hoo, we don't like equality. Give us special treatment. When you have equality that isn't equality, it must be feminism. Again, all of these, I mean, everyone who reads this article, it seems everyone who reads this article realizes, I mean, this is a left-wing news site, so presumably the readers are leftist, and still, I mean, everyone in here, every comment I've seen has just been horrified by this. But this isn't, but this is not just one lone article, right? I mean, you could kind of write this off as, oh no, that's not real feminism. That's not mainstream. This is just some radical. No, this same sentiment, written by many different authors, why misandry and misogyny should be treated differently when it comes to hate crimes, by the New Statesman, which is another liberal news website, well respected. Vice, which is a very well-respected liberal news site, the Broadly section, which is the feminist department of Vice. Feminist activists fear misandry could become a hate crime in the UK, and then it makes this same argument. It makes this same argument that if we treat sexism equally under the law, that it's going to somehow hurt women. It mentions Jessica Eaton of Victim Focus. Okay. And then this is Jessica Eaton's actual article in The Guardian, which again is a very well-respected, believe it's a British, it could be U.S., but it's a very well respected liberal journal. Okay, it's been around for a long time. These are 4 mainstream liberal news sites printing the same article and not speaking about them in an unbiased way. You know, they are making the argument that making misandry a hate crime will embolden abusive men. And these are just 4 papers, 4 media sites that I found on after a quick Google search. There's probably more, okay? So let's just look at this real quick, just the opening subtext here. It's already too easy for men to cry foul every time a woman says or does anything they don't like. Don't enshrine that into law. Again, this is the most incredible kind of playing the victim while also engaging in psychological projection. Just within the past week, a very close friend of mine has been involved in a case in which someone she knows was falsely accused, her best friend was falsely accused of sexual assault. And she knows it was falsely accused because the woman did it out of revenge. The woman made a vengeful, retaliative strike to try to get this person fired, to try to get this man fired. And she knew that she could use sexual assault. That's just within the past week. Something has happened. I mean, every single day I read these articles in which women use their power, this ability to make sexual assault accusations against men, false sexual assault accusations, to get away with anything they want, to ruin the man's life or destroy him. Here's something that just happened a few days ago. Seneca Valley School District in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania is facing a lawsuit from a former male student who was forced out of the school and investigated for sexual assault due to a series of false accusations made by female students. The girls dubbed Mean Girls in the lawsuit, a reference to the 2004 Lindsay Lohan film. But by the way, the girls in Mean Girls were nowhere near as bad as these girls because they didn't accuse anyone in the film of sexual assault. They weren't even that evil. Admitted on tape that they made up the assault story. One said, "I just don't like him and I would do anything to get him expelled." Okay. These girls, they have no reason to dislike this kid. He hasn't done anything to them. They just don't like him. They don't like the cut of his jib. You know, he talks funny, or he's creepy, or, I don't know, they just woke up one morning and decided this particular male, we're going to destroy his life because we have nothing better to do. But they can, right? They have the ability to do it. The false allegations were life derailing for the accused, who is referred to as TF in the lawsuit. On October 3rd, 2017, one of the girls told the other students that TF had sexually assaulted her at a pool. A Seneca Valley guidance counselor overheard the accusation and reported it to Childline, the state's child abuse prevention agency, as required by law. TF was swiftly charged with indecent assault and harassment and received 6 months of probation as part of the plea deal. Months later, in March, TF again was falsely accused. So again, here we have this concerted conspiracy, basically, a personal character assassination by this group of girls. Another girl invited him over to a house party, and then a few days later she told the school's guidance counselor that he had broken into her home and sexually assaulted her. The lawsuit claimed she was coached by his first accuser. As a result of this accusation, TF was charged with assault and criminal trespassing. He was removed from the school and leg and wrist shackles and spent 9 days in juvenile detention. So here's the claim. It's already too easy for men to cry foul every time a woman says or does anything they don't like. Don't enshrine that in the law. What? These women don't even have a reason for disliking him, right? They just don't. Who knows why? This is just the most brutal kind of projection in the world. I mean, how can you, and what we'll hear from feminists, what we'll hear from people on the liberal side, they'll say, you know, false accusations are so rare. Quit bringing this up. Quit bringing up false accusations, please. They're so rare. 2%. It's just 2% of all sex accusations or rape accusations are false. We hear this all the time. 2%, whatever. This is an article by Washington Times, written just a couple weeks ago. False reports of sexual assault, not as rare as claimed, studies show. Brent E. Turvey, a criminologist, wrote a 2017 book that dispels his notion. His research and that of two co-authors cited statistical studies and police crime reports. One academic study showed that as many as 40% of sexual assault charges are false. So, again, there's a narrative that we're being spun here, okay? But it's amazing. It is just incredible. The projection, the playing the victim. Look, this Jessica Eaton, the woman who wrote this article, she has a website called Victim Focus. She is the founder and owner of Victim Focus, the Victim Focus blog, and the Eaton Foundation. She's not even denying it, right? Victim Focus, right? We're all about victims. This is her website. This is her whole thing, is that women are victims and we're helping the victims. It is all based on this whole victim playing complex. So to answer my original question based on the title of the video, is feminism really about equality? No, it's not. I mean, if these articles appearing in major liberal newspapers are any indication, no, it is not about equality. And it's not enough for you if you're here, if you're listening to me and you consider yourself a feminist or a progressive, whatever. It is not enough for you to just hand wave this off and say, well, they're not true feminists. These women, these feminists in Britain trying to prevent sexism under the law being treated equally, they're not true feminists. No, it's not enough for you to do that, right? This is just one of many examples happening all the time in which feminism makes it clear, modern radical feminism, which is the mainstream version of feminism, makes it perfectly clear that they have no intention of fighting for equality between men and women, and what they actually want is special treatment. And if you consider yourself a feminist and you find this horrible, which you should, I encourage you to do more than just sit there and shake your head or hand wave it off and say, well, they're not true feminists. You need to be speaking up about it, because if I don't see any feminists speaking up about how this is so horribly wrong and unfair, I'm just going to assume you accept it. Because as far as I can tell, this is the mainstream feminism view. This is the mainstream narrative that we hear every single day in the news, in the media, etc. So please, prove me wrong. I would love for you to prove me wrong. Thank you for watching.